Okay, so we have a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time. So yes. So in the interest of the pace and flow of this webinar, I'd like to go over some general housekeeping items. Okay, so if you're just joining us for the first time in this webinar series, or just joining us at this point, this is the webinar for the coordinated call for projects, which was issued on November 12th, this year. In this call for projects, TxDOT-PTN is requesting applications for various public transportation projects relating to Federal Transit Administration or FTA programs. In this case, once again, road discretionary, RD, and intercity bus, ICB. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide a high-level walkthrough of the updates to the application language, process, and instructions for the RD and ICB programs. So everyone's muted upon entry, but I do ask all phones be muted for the duration of the webinar, which should not be a problem if everyone's muted on entry. So you're actually not able to unmute yourself by design. So please don't try to mute yourself, I guess, during the presentation if you happen to find a little hack for that. So I need everyone to please ask your questions using chat throughout the course of this presentation, and I'll address all the questions, I promise, during the Q&A session. After the webinar, you're also welcome to please feel free to submit any additional questions that come to mind or you may have to the email address listed on the resources slide. You'll hear me say that slide throughout the presentation because it's a nice catch-all, one-stop shop for information, and as the name implies, resources. Once again, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on TxDOT's website. So let's go ahead and head over to the agenda now and view the topics of discussion. So today I'll be covering the following items. We'll be going over the two programs, the two programs of RD and ICB. We'll take a look at the schedule, primarily the milestones, the next steps milestones of the total schedule. But we won't be actually drilling down into the application instructions, but I will speak on them and provide guidance on those the instructions themselves. And then I've got some important notices for everyone that I want to share, as well as some points of emphasis. And of course, another item is item number 6 is the budget milestones. Some guidance there. So this webinar is all about guidance. And then of course we'll have our Q&A after this, after my presentation. Okay, so the RD and ICB program scopes, as you see outlined in this table, are also identified on page 4 of the application instructions. In short, any proposed project submitted for consideration for funding must meet the scope identified here and in the application instructions. If applying for an ICB program project, aside from the high-level scope that you see here on the screen, we ask that you please take a closer look at the objectives, program requirements, and service route, as the language has been updated to correlate with the updated program priorities, which I promise I will cover in more detail later in the presentation. So two things I want to, I guess, touch on in this slide without reading it to so much is for road discretionary, the highlighted portion where it states that funds are available for this call projects which cannot reasonably be funded through FTA and state program formula allocations. Intercity bus, it essentially states that the scope is to meet the intercity mobility needs of residents in rural areas, consistent with the identified objectives. Okay, so this table outlines the next steps, major target milestones from the schedule on page 12 of the application instructions. And I'll just note that two items: the deadline for submitting written questions is Friday, January 7th, and the deadline for the application submission, highlighted here nicely in yellow, is February 4th, but it's 5 p.m. CST, February 4th, 2022. We are targeting recommending awards at the June 30th, 2022 commission meeting, and we anticipate year one project grant agreements, or PGAs, starting September 1st of 2022. Okay, so this slide outlines the table of contents of the application instructions, and I want to touch on a few items of interest. So every applicant is encouraged to read the entire call of projects instructions, but regardless of what funding is being applied for, sections 1 through section 4 apply to all the applications, as well as section 6 and 7, of course, the glossary and the attachments. But once again, everybody's I'll repeat this. Everybody's encouraged to read the instructions, the entire call for project instructions. And for those who attended the general overview webinar, may recall the descriptions that were provided for each section. In the interest of time, I will only provide updates specifically for RD and ICB, just in case someone may have not attended the overview webinar. So one of the things I want to touch on is in section 1 overview, we have the matrix for funding choices. My guidance there is that our guidance there is that we encourage everyone to closely read the matrix to determine what type of funding your organization is eligible for. And then if you're looking at the section 5 of the programs, we ask that you please review the scope, objectives, program requirements, and evaluation criteria for the RD and ICB programs in detail, particularly if applying for ICB funding, which has it has a greater number of changes of the two in this call for projects. When I say changes, changes from the last call for projects. And then we have section 7, which is attachments. This is a restate or a repeat from the general overview, but I wanted to go ahead and restate it or state it in case someone did not attend that session. So we provided a transit facility pipeline roadmap that breaks down the phases in the life cycle of a project. We also included a vehicle life standards table, and new this year is an ICB priority connections map, which should be referenced if applying for ICB funds. And just a few things to note about the coordinated call for process, or I'm sorry, coordinated call, the process itself. So the coordinated call for projects opportunity for funding is published biannually or every 2 years. So essentially it gets published in the notice. The notice of call for project gets published in the Texas Register and will be, of course, next time around in fall of 2023. When determining a project start date, this is speaking on bullet number 2, please ensure to identify or provide the target start date in the application. Speaking on bullet 3, all coordinated call for project applications are required to be submitted in eGrants, TxDOT-PTN's grant management system and system of record. And I emphasize that all support documentation is required to be uploaded in eGrants. Very important, please be certain to change the status to application submitted review by the deadline, as eGrants as a system is designed to not allow applications beyond the due date and time. A few other items I'd like to bring up is that if you're already set up in eGrants, you should see the opportunities for RD and ICB programs. Otherwise, you'll want to contact the PTN and eGrants help desk. The help desk information is located on resources slide of this presentation. If you do not have access to eGrants, you'll want to contact your agency systems administrator. Speaking on bullet number 4, the MGA and certain insurances do not, and I repeat, do not need to be completed prior to submission, but are required to be on file prior to TxDOT-PTN distributing a project grant agreement or PGA. And both are also prerequisites to a fully executed grant agreement. Another important notice is the Transit Technical Service Program. And this is a reminder if anybody, anyone who attended the general overview, it's a reminder from that webinar and that the TTSP is available now, and unlike this call for projects, is non-competitive. However, this program is currently not. It is currently only open to rural transit districts or RTDs who are TxDOT subrecipients. If you have questions regarding whether your project is eligible for TTSP, you're welcome to submit your questions to ttsp@txdot.gov. Submitting your questions early would help determine whether your proposed project is eligible for TTSP or not, and help to answer the question of submitting an application for this call for project. The email address I just quoted is listed on the resources slide. So instructions for filling out the application and submitting for filling out and submitting the application are actually contained within the online application itself. You literally have to click a button to open the application, and the instructions are embedded within. So let's take a closer look at the program, the eligibility, and the criteria as outlined in this slide here. So in a nutshell, the window of opportunity is now open. The categories outlined are in blue text, which are the financial management analysis, capital project development, and operational and service analysis. And if your proposed project meets the criteria falling into one of these categories, we suggest exploring your options further. And one thing I wanted to point out under the eligibility bullet, you'll see that it states that if a project is eligible for TTSP, it may be moved to the TTSP program. So there's several ways to make that determination, whether on a voluntary or I guess on a proactive basis, or whether we make that discovery at the application step. So on this slide, I've captured some, at the high level, the items you should take note when reading the application instructions. I've outlined items that were added or updated for both RD and ICB since the last call for projects. In this case, you can see facilities, ICB operating in the ICB program as a whole. These are what I call points of emphasis, and close examination should be exercised by the proposer and the reader of the application instructions. In terms of details or interpretation of the language, if you have questions, please submit them via chat or the email address provided on the resources slide after this webinar. As for the guides provided in blue text throughout the application instructions, we ask that you please do not, once again, please do not copy and paste the guidance language as part of your response. And also, the guidance is designed to expand on the specific question it is addressing. Sort of when we ask this question, this is what we mean. The guidance is not designed to fully expand on the question, but once again, it's designed to ask. It's designed to ask when. To state when we ask this question, this is what we mean. Okay. I apologize. I said this guidance is not designed. It's designed to expand on the question. It's just the broader portion of the question is what I meant. Okay, another point of emphasis on ICB. So in the previous slide, I outlined some of the changes for RD and ICB. For ICB, I'd like to elaborate or expand on the priorities that have been outlined here. And these could be located on page 54 of the application instructions. So TxDOT-PTN has identified specific priorities for the ICB program, which are based on the Texas ICB Strategic Direction Report and the Texas ICB study. Both documents will be posted on PTN's website by November 30th of this year. So As an outcome of the Intercity Bus Program Strategic Direction Report approved by the Public Transportation Advisory Committee, or PTAC, in 2019, a consultant was selected to conduct a comprehensive statewide ICB study. The ICB study examined integrating and leveraging ICB funding with other funds to support and sustain access to intercity connections for rural areas residents to longer distance urbanized area destinations, including but not limited to connections to the national intercity bus, passenger rail, and general aviation networks. So priority ICB connections are identified by the ICB study and have been included on page 55 of the application instructions. And as mentioned earlier in the content slide, an ICB priority connections map is included in the attachments section of the application instructions. So taking a closer look at this slide, I highlighted some areas to call attention to them. One of them is, so you look at the bullet number 1, in highlight is, we're talking about routes that have been identified as priority connection to be sustained in the ICB study. In short, it's tying back to the ICB study. Bullet number 2, routes identified by the ICB study will be prioritized over other new routes. Once again, tying back to the ICB study. Then we have transition funding for proposals to sustain underperforming, historically unsubsidized service connections. What that means in short is, if it was not identified in the ICB study, what's being offered as a priority is a transition funding. And as you can see there, to allow time for ID and implementation of alternative sources of funding and or service designed by the service provider. Okay, budget milestones. So, but guidance is given for the budget milestones page for each program in section 5. We ask that you please pay careful attention to the guidance that's given, because some of the programs only allow specific budget activity line items, or ALIs, which are identified in the guidance. We also ask you please pay close attention to the language in this slide as well, as it relates to indirect costs, as it will not be considered allowed if it's not specified in the application. So if it's not included in the application, it will not be allowed, in short. Also, please be certain to provide all your support documentation that you wish to claim, for in-kind match. All support documentation, any support documentation, it all has to be uploaded into eGrants. Even if you will be applying for a multi-year funding, we ask that you only include year 1 funds on the budget milestones form. So you'll upload a multi-year budget sheet, but in the budget milestones, you will only indicate the year 1 funding. The multi-year budget sheet can be located on the website within the instructions, and we do ask that if you can please leave the document in its original form, which is in this Microsoft Excel. Toll or transportation credits or TDCs are available upon request and will be reviewed for appropriateness based on ALI types. And TxDOT uses toll credits essentially to award TDCs to public transportation applicants under consideration for funding. Just a super quick background on TDCs. Also, at minimum, each ALI requires, in this, in the budget milestones form, each ALI requires contract start date and end. If you propose a procurement in your application, we need an RFP/IFP. We need which is required. If you will be proposing a vehicle purchase, the delivery-related milestones must be provided as well. That's a lot of information in short amount of time. At this time, I'm going to look at the chat window for any questions that may have been posted earlier. Also, at this time, please feel free to use the chat to ask questions. If I'm unable to answer your question at this point, I'll take it offline and get a response to you as soon as possible. You're welcome to, if you think of a question after the webinar presentation, like I mentioned earlier, you'll want to send it to the TxDOT email address at PTN_program management@TxDOT.gov. Do I have any questions? Issues or concerns? Let me speak on this slide here, and if you give you time to think, if you have any questions. So for the clarification of this call for projects, you're going to want to contact the TxDOT-PTN at the email address at the top. For questions regarding e-grants or to get set up in e-grants, please contact the help desk, either via the email or by phone. TxDOT's responses to written questions will be posted on the PTN website, and you can use this link here to view it, view those questions. Interested applicants should check the website periodically for updates. And also, a final Q&A document will be posted on the PTN website once all the questions and responses are complete. Once we've compiled all the Q&A. So I'm going to check chat again, see if there's any questions I've come across. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions so far. I'll give you guys a few more minutes here. I want to make sure I'm using this chat feature correctly as well. Okay, if there's no questions, then we thank you for attending this webinar, and I wish everybody a good and happy holiday next week. And, thank you again for attending. Have a good day.